Before I delve into the bulk of this story, here's some brief context. This past weekend, I had a friend's wedding. The ceremony and reception took place at a quaint little club in Asbury Park, NJ. It was a good time, of course. The only thing about Asbury Park is, it's a very crowded shore town with limited parking and overnighting. So, in an attempt to give his guests a place to stay after the festivities, my friend booked a hotel block at an ancient-looking building near the boardwalk called the Berkeley Hotel. At some point in the recent past, the hotel went through major renovations to bring it into the present. These days, the place is known for being a bit run down, but still very modern. With its chic bar and rules like allowing pets, it's become a hub for young partiers spending long nights clubbing in Asbury Park. Though, despite the modernization, a dark secret lurks within this hotel. This very secret is what I had the displeasure of discovering the night of the wedding. It all began when we arrived back at the hotel after the wedding reception ended. It was about 10 p.m. and my friend had a cool little after party scheduled at the hotel bar. My fiancé and I went up to our room to freshen up, hydrate, and prepare to hang out at the party for a while. Randomly, it occurred to me that we had only been using the elevators to travel between the ground floor and the 5th floor where our room was located. The elevators were heavily trafficked and very slow, and the more we used them, the more impatient I got. I began flirting with the idea of looking for a stairwell, which I hadn't seen yet for some reason. We had to be at the party though, so I ignored this thought for the time. Fast forward a bit, and as we were at the after party, my fiancé got a little chilly. Being a gentleman, I offered to go back up to our room to retrieve a coat for her. She obliged. Not wanting to miss too much of the party, I briskly walked to the elevators and scoffed at a large mass of people looking to go up. Luckily, the doors promptly opened and we squeezed in like sardines in a can. That crowd was the final straw for me, and I decided I would look for a stairwell to travel back down. I quickly entered our hotel room, grabbed a jacket and exited, prepared to find some stairs. Oddly, my look didn't take long. About 10 feet away from the entrance to our room was an unmarked door. This made no sense to me. This mystery door was not there before. Before anyone thinks it, no, I was not drunk and I have great perception, so there was no way I'd miss an entire door. It was simply wallpaper before. But at the time, since the door looked like your characteristic stairwell door, I brushed off the unease and opened it up. Sure enough, I found an ordinary set of stairs going up and down. Coat in hand, I bounded downward. All noise aside from my footsteps abruptly faded as I descended. After several seconds of this, I hit the landing for floor 4, and continued down another flight as expected. This was the point in this situation where all reason and logic ended. I reached the next floor, which I obviously presumed to be the 3rd. Surveying the landing, I expected a floor 3 door and another flight of stairs. What I got was a completely dead end to my right, and a shady, unmarked door directly ahead of me. I looked around carefully. The dead end was a small hallway, packed with what appeared to be janitor supplies, but there really was no descent to floor 2 in sight. The stairs simply ended on what should be floor 3. Why did this building have a stairwell that descended down to a stop at the 3rd floor? Getting a bit freaked out, I decided to not spend time speculating and just enter the unmarked door. Then I could look out for the elevator. On the other side of the door was what appeared to be an ordinary hotel hallway at first. The rooms were indeed marked with 3s, so I knew I was on the 3rd floor for sure. The thing is, I soon noticed a couple of things were off. For one, the layout was slightly different than the floors above. It honestly looked like the hallway itself didn't fit the shape of the building I was in. Second, the lights were off for a huge portion of the hallway, which was eerie. Combine this with an absolutely dead silence and lack of any people. And finally, there was the feeling. I wouldn't call myself a believer of the paranormal and like to think I always have a good handle on my anxiety. As such, I don't tend to get weird feelings, as they say. But standing in that hallway was like nothing I have ever experienced. The atmosphere felt surreal, and I had this nagging sense that I shouldn't be there. Creeping myself out again, I reminded myself to just go down the hall and look for the elevator. I'd just take the crowded but easy way as usual. As I walked in the direction the elevator should have been in, I quickly noticed this wasn't going to happen. There was no sign of an elevator or even a shaft where one could have been. All I could find was just hotel rooms and empty walls. But how? It almost felt like I was in a completely different building than the Berkeley Hotel. Not wanting to lose my cool anymore, my next plan was to keep going and look for another stairwell that led down to the next floor. Well, roughly about 150 feet from where I entered this bizarre hallway, it finally happened. I reached yet another dead end, and to my left was a stairwell. The thing was, this was an open set of stairs with no door concealing them, and the wall past the stairs, right before the dead end, was cut off midway with a railing, allowing me to peek over into a loft of sorts, about half a floor down. Again, this geometry made no sense. Why did the unmarked, dimly lit third floor of a hotel have such random floor plans? As this thought crossed my mind, I noticed a small shelf under the stairs in the loft. Stacked upon it were books. Even from where I was, about 10 feet up, I could see the text on the covers of these books was unfamiliar to say the least. I'm no polylinguist, but I'm decently acquainted with how most languages are written, and I knew the characters covering those books didn't belong to any language currently in use. It almost looked like Hebrew, but it was written too sharply and lacked any sort of penmanship. At this point, the dead silence was broken by a faint whisper. It was sustained and sounded like someone exhaling and speaking tongues at the same time. To make matters worse, I couldn't determine exactly where the whisper was coming from. Thoroughly startled, my mind was screaming at me to bail, but I then spotted a brightly lit hallway jutting off from the loft below me in an awkward direction. So, against my better judgment, I entered the loft and hastily approached the hallway. At the end was a door identical to the stairwell I first found on the 5th floor. It even was marked, "Stairs to 2nd floor." My fears were somewhat alleviated, but quickly replaced by confusion. Nonetheless, I had wasted enough time here and wanted to get back to the party. So I yanked the door open, entered the seemingly normal stairwell, and closed the door securely behind me. With that, the whispering stopped. Looking back, I really wish I had just turned around when I saw those books and heard that sound. The 3rd floor should have been enough of a red flag to me with all of its irregularities, but hey, my pride got the best of me. The stairwell again ended in a dead end just one flight down. A door lay before me marked simply with 2, written in Roman numerals. The fact that it switched from written English to Roman numerals was a bit unnerving, but not much compared to what I'd already seen. I entered through the door into a completely dark hotel hallway. When I say completely dark, I mean I couldn't even see my hands at first. The only visible light came from the room numbers, which somehow glowed with a faint lime green hue. The unsettling feeling I had on the 3rd floor was amplified tenfold, and my ears almost seemed to buzz with static. I really felt like I wasn't supposed to be in that hallway. Finally, my common sense kicked in and I decided I'd had enough. But when I turned around to open the door I just used, it was gone. All that remained was an empty wall. Panicking, I ran to the left again, hoping there would be an elevator shaft. Nothing. The buzzing feeling in my ears began to grow louder, and the temperature abruptly dropped to near freezing as I hurried through the dark hall. After running for what felt like 30 seconds or so, I saw a hotel room with an open door. The door was cracked ever so slightly, but it was the first one I could actually enter. The buzzing in my ears was still going, and the temperature was so cold I could see my breath. But for some reason beyond me, I decided to take a peek inside that room. I approached the door and widened it ever so little, just to look in. At the end of the room was a large set of windows typical for the Berkeley. But outside was a twilight sky that didn't seem to be of Earth. A large moon, unfamiliar to the one I grew up looking at, sat squarely in the sky, flooding the room with an almost orange light. Whatever was outside wasn't Asbury Park. Suddenly, my awe was broken by a shadowy mass floating into view. Peering from the far corner of the room, behind one of the twin beds. It settled right in front of the two windows. It was far away from me, right next to the windows, but I could tell this thing was huge, probably 7 feet tall at least. It looked like a human figure, but appeared to be made entirely of shadow. At that point, I think I heard it say something. I used the word think because I'm not sure if the sound was coming through my ears or from within my mind, just like the buzzing. Regardless, the creature seemed to be speaking an unknown language in a deep, inhuman tone. Then, as I was standing there, peering into that cursed hotel room, I suddenly got this guttural feeling that the shadow had seen me. Sure enough, a second or so later it rushed towards the door. Towards me. Metaphorically, as it hit my pants, I careened down the hallway from whence I came, never looking back. The world around me almost felt like it was vibrating, as the buzzing disoriented me beyond belief. Only sheer adrenaline was keeping me going. Eventually, I hit a dead end, but through my well-adjusted eyes I could see a door. A stairwell door. Without hesitation, I flung it open and took one last look behind me. 10 feet or so away was the shadowy mass. It seemed to be staring me down, silently. As I looked on, the phrase,
"Don't come back. You don't belong in this place,"
pierced my mind in a deep, hollow tone. With that, I slammed the door and ascended the stairs, as there was no way down. The stairs were longer than any previous ones, but ended with the 5th floor, which just so happened to be the very floor I started on. I exited the stairwell door and somehow was exactly where I had entered, right near my hotel room. What the actual hell did I just experience? I said out loud, to the amusement of some nearby drunks. I turned to them. Listen, do yourselves a favor and stay the hell away from that door I just came through. With that, I went to the elevator and decided that patience really was a virtue. As I entered the elevator alone, preparing to finally go back to the party, I noticed one thing. There were no 2nd or 3rd floor buttons in the elevator. It just skipped from 1 to 4. Hey, this happened a couple days ago and I'm still processing it. In the moment, I was so sure that I was in incredible danger, but it's barely 48 hours later and I'm already second-guessing myself. But either something incredibly wrong happened on that hike, or I'm going insane. So I'll share my story and let you decide. I suppose I should probably start with some context. I, 24 male, am currently on a solo road trip around the Midwest. I know that seeing the sights in places like Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio probably doesn't sound like the most exciting vacation, but for me it's kind of a big deal. It's the first time I'm traveling for more than a day or two, away from home and everyone I know, truly on my own. At first, I wanted to do something big and exciting, like spending a week in Iceland, or joining a tour to Alaska. But it was all just too overwhelming, so I settled for a much tamer vacation. I figured it would be a good first step, and if all went well, I'd have the confidence for a bigger trip next year. And what could possibly go wrong in the Midwest? Well, I have, or at least had, 3 hikes planned for my trip, and the first one was a couple of days ago. It also happened to be the longest and most remote of the 3. For anyone who's interested, I decided to do the Red Cedar Trail in Giant City State Park. It's a 12-mile loop that pretty much covers the whole park. According to the internet, it's one of the best hiking trails in Illinois, and it seemed like a good balance for me between challenging and manageable. Now, I've done larger and far more dangerous hikes before this. Admittedly, those were done with other far more experienced hikers leading the way, but I still knew how to appropriately prepare. I made sure I had plenty of fluids, water and Powerade, some trail mix, bandages, sunscreen, etc. I had a paper map as well as a digital copy on my phone. I let multiple people back home know which trail I was doing and that I hoped to hike roughly from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. I let my parents know that if they didn't hear from me by 7 p.m. or so, they should contact the park to let them know I might be lost or injured. I did everything right, but no amount of preparation would have helped with this. The first thing that went wrong was the weather. I woke up at about 7 a.m. to gray skies and the sound of steady rain. It wasn't a storm, but it was certainly more than a drizzle. I tried not to lose hope and checked the forecast, but I saw that the rain wouldn't stop until late afternoon at the earliest. I don't really mind being out in the rain too much, as long as I'm prepared for it, but I knew it would make the trails muddy and the rocks slick. Still, I decided I had come all this way for the sake of this hike, and I would at least try it. I figured if it really was terrible, I could always turn back early, so I threw on my rain jacket and drove to the trailhead. To get to the trail, I drove past several individual camping sites that people can use. Every other time I've been to a state park, it's been packed. Kids running around yelling about the rules of whatever game they've just made up. Families fighting over who forgot to pack the marshmallows. But on this rainy Tuesday at the end of summer, the park seemed pretty much deserted. I think out of the dozens of sites I passed, I saw a grand total of 2 RVs and 1 tent, and none of them had any people out and about. When I pulled into the small parking lot next to the trailhead, I was the only car there. Maybe the lack of people should have made me nervous, but I was honestly excited to have all this nature to myself. For those who care, you can find a map of the Red Cedar Trail online. But basically, the trail really is pretty much a big, very irregular circle. The trailhead is at the innermost point, and there's a basic campground at the halfway point on the westernmost edge with some fire pits, picnic tables, and outhouses. On a whim, I went south first, going counterclockwise around the trail. As I started down the path between the trees, I immediately realized a few things. First, I was definitely the first one to walk the trail that day, and maybe the first in quite a while. I cleared out about a dozen cobwebs with my face in the first 10 seconds, and they didn't thin out after that. Second, the trail was definitely soggy, but still firm enough to hike. Third, the dense foliage above my head made the falling rain very loud as it fell on the leaves, but also reduced the steady current of water to occasional fat droplets that usually missed me completely. And so I walked. The trail was generally pretty obvious. It's hard to miss a line of bare dirt in the middle of thick plant life. There were portions, however, where the trail was so overgrown I started to doubt it was even a trail at all, and other portions where several trails intersected, and I wasn't sure which was the correct path forward. Luckily, the path was marked by white diamonds with red circles, generally nailed into trees. As long as I saw a white diamond, I knew I was going the right way. Despite spending a lot of brain power between watching my step, looking for diamonds, and dodging the cobwebs, I still really enjoyed the first half of the loop. The thick branches above me ensured that the rain was soothing and peaceful, rather than irritating and uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the continued lack of literally any other human being allowed for a quiet contemplation unlike anything I've had in months. And so, after 3 hours, I hit the halfway point, a little tired and very wet, but extremely glad I had decided to go through with the hike despite the rain. Then, things started to change. The campsite at the halfway point was empty, which I rather expected. I doubted anybody would have camped there the night before, considering how few people were in the main portion of the park. And even if they had, there was a good chance they would have packed up and headed out by then. But somehow, the emptiness of the space felt wrong. I really don't know how to describe it, other than it was quiet. I don't just mean I couldn't hear cars or people, or even that there was less animal noises, although all of that was true. I mean everything just seemed deafened. The rain on the surrounding trees didn't seem to be falling as heavily. The wind, that had been rising and falling for hours, suddenly seemed to die completely. Even the outhouse doors creaking seemed quieter than it should be. At the time, I just shrugged it off. The rain was dying down and the hinges must have been oiled recently by a ranger. No big deal, I told myself as I left the clearing to tackle the northern half of the trail. Unlike the southern half, which regularly opens up into wide flat sections and small clearings, the northern half of the Red Cedar Trail is almost entirely through dense foliage. And when I say dense, I mean I frequently had to duck or turn sideways to make sure the reaching branches didn't snag on my jacket. The trail itself was almost completely covered by foliage at points, and more than once I accidentally wandered off the trail on what seemed like the path of least resistance for a little bit, before realizing I didn't see any white diamonds ahead of me. About a quarter of a mile into this thicker, darker portion of the woods, I heard a sudden rustling from maybe a dozen feet behind me. Now, I'm no stranger to walking in the woods. I figured it was a small, harmless animal, and when I looked back and didn't see anything, I assumed I must be right. Honestly, even now, I still think that particular rustle was probably a squirrel. But the sudden sound made me realize that being alone in the woods, miles away from literally any other human, may be great for quiet contemplation, but can also make you very vulnerable. At this point though, all I could do was keep going. I was already past the halfway point. The only way out that made sense was forward. As I continued, I kept hearing sounds that put me more and more on edge. While the rain continued to drum on the leaves overhead, there were more rustlings in nearby bushes and trees. Easy enough to shrug off, but still enough to make you jump. Enough to make you imagine patterns. More than once, some combination of falling water and or animal movement behind me was enough to convince me that I heard the footsteps of something moving quickly behind me. Of course, nothing was ever there, but I started to get a little paranoid. I didn't think there were any dangerous animals in the park, but maybe I was wrong. I tried not to think about whether it would be worse to have a bear or a person running up from behind. But worse than the rustling leaves or the falling water was a sound that I started hearing maybe about a mile past the halfway point. I can only describe it as a kind of wet cough. Each time, I heard a single percussive noise off to the side of the trail, simultaneously breathy and moist. Maybe a deer could make that noise? I thought to myself. Or wait, don't people hunt out here? Oh man, what if there's a guy out there with a gun? Suddenly, I was terrified that some hunter might mistake me for an animal in the dim light and thick leaves, so I called out to make sure there wouldn't be any accidents. Hey, I'm a human. Leave me alone, please. I felt embarrassed almost as soon as I said it, but it still seemed like a good idea. Whether it was animals or humans making the noises around me, they probably knew that I was here. I hadn't exactly been quiet as I hiked my way through the brush. Announcing myself would encourage animals to give me more space and make sure humans wouldn't accidentally shoot me. After my little announcement to the forest, the wet coughs stopped and I started to relax. But then, a much more disturbing sound started. Every 5 minutes or so, I'd hear what sounded like a little girl's voice, maybe 10 or so years old. It sounded incredibly human, a lot like my younger sister, but I never heard it long enough or clearly enough to make out any words. I'd hear maybe a vowel sound and the hint of a consonant, and it'd be gone. It was always behind me, always sounding like it was over the hill or a couple of turns in the trail back. More than once I called out again like I did before. Hey, anyone there? I'm a person. Please don't mess with me. But I never got a response. I really started to worry, but kept searching for ways to rationalize it. I've heard that people can experience auditory hallucinations when they are isolated from the world for extended periods of time. I didn't think 4 hours or so in the woods counted as extended, but it was better than imagining a ghost child following behind me. Either way, walking forward still seemed like the best and only option. It'd get me away from the creepy sounds and back to my car, so I could drive far away and stop freaking myself out. Honestly, at this point, a part of me was laughing at myself. I knew that all of this was just me overthinking and scaring myself, and that I was just imagining things. I tried to keep calm by thinking about other things. I thought about what I'd get for dinner once I was done. I thought about the D&D campaign I'm supposed to run this weekend. I thought about how much my feet were starting to hurt. Anything but how creeped out I was. And honestly, it worked. For a little bit, at least. For maybe a mile or so, I managed to lose myself in my thoughts and just walk without noticing or caring overly much about what did or didn't happen around me. Until suddenly, a loud echoing thud forced my attention back to my current situation. It seemed like it came from just on the other side of the hill I was currently walking alongside, and happened exactly once before the woods went silent again, other than the rain falling above. My brain raced trying to figure out what it could have been. It wasn't a gunshot, I'm sure of it. It was much heavier and duller, if that makes sense. It almost sounded like the trunk of a car slamming shut, but far louder and heavier than any trunk I've ever heard. Maybe a tree falling? Honestly, I still don't know what that sound was, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that when that thud broke my train of thought is when I finally realized that I hadn't seen a white diamond in at least half an hour. I tried not to panic. I've been following this trail the entire time. There's no way I'm lost. But is it really the trail, or is it just a trail? Is it a trail at all? Have I just been following a stream for an entire mile? It has been extra muddy lately. I stood there and thought for a long time about what to do, and eventually decided I had to follow this trail I'd been following backwards until I found a white diamond again. Otherwise, who knew how long I might be wandering in these woods? But as I turned around to head back, I slipped on a wet rock protruding from the ground and fell forward. I managed to catch myself well enough that I had no major injuries, but that's not why this fall was such a big deal. I couldn't have been on the ground for more than a second or two, but before I could get back up, I heard that same damn wet cough, but this time, it was only a couple of inches above my head. I'm not ashamed to admit I screamed as loud as I could, kicking and thrashing about, trying to hit whatever had coughed in my ear, but I only managed to punch a nearby tree and bruise my hand. I was on my feet no more than 3 seconds after the cough, wildly turning in circles, searching in every direction for whatever had made that noise. But nothing was there, just me, the woods, and the rain. As my heartbeat gradually slowed, I realized something that made my heart sink far more than all the sounds I'd been hearing. I was still on the trail I had been following, if it even was a trail, but between my fall and my wild spins to catch some sign of whatever might have been tormenting me, I'd completely lost track of which direction I'd come from. I didn't have a compass with me, and between the thick clouds above me and the fact that it was near noon, I had no way to judge west from east, let alone north to south. I pulled out my phone to try and call for help. Even if there was nothing out here with me, I was lost in the woods, and that's a good enough reason to call 911. But it was dead. Didn't make any sense. It had been at 78% when I pulled it out to check the time at the halfway point, but now it wouldn't turn on. I considered just staying where I was and waiting for someone to find me. Surely I wasn't that far off the main trails. But waiting meant staying here in the woods by myself for hours, if not longer. Hours spent cold, wet, afraid, and alone. Or, even worse, maybe not alone. In the end, I knew I couldn't just stay here, so I picked a direction and started walking along what I prayed was the trail. I wanted to run, but I didn't. I knew trying to run through the mud and wet rocks would just make me fall, and maybe this time I'd break something, so I kept my pace slow and steady. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I had already called out to anyone who could hear me more than once and gotten no reply. Doing so again would be a waste of breath at best, and at worst might anger whoever or whatever was out there with me. So I stayed quiet. I wanted to look behind me, but I didn't. Not when I heard rustling footsteps. Not when I heard wet coughs. Not when I heard fragments of a little girl's voice from just a little ways back. I knew I wouldn't see anything, or I wouldn't like what I did see, so I didn't turn around. For over an hour, I walked with no sign that this would ever end. Every turn of the path I followed just led to more thick woods. Every step felt harder than the last. Every sound behind me sounded closer than the one before. Every minute that passed made me more and more sure I wouldn't be able to make it out of these woods. And then suddenly, I was looking at a white diamond with a red circle just a few feet ahead of me, and there was another one up ahead. The rain had died down to almost a complete stop. The wet coughs that had been happening every few seconds almost right behind my head ceased. Slowly, I turned my head to look behind me and saw nothing but an empty trail. I didn't wait for things to go wrong again. I picked up my pace as much as I safely could and made sure to follow the diamonds carefully. I didn't walk more than 5 steps in any given direction unless I could see a marker up ahead. Gradually, the trees were spread further and further apart, and the foliage surrounding me thinned, until suddenly, I was back at the trailhead. I've never been happier to see an empty parking lot. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I laughed out loud as I started to make my way towards the car, when I heard the last and worst sound of the entire hike from behind me. I'm a human. It was my voice. It was my voice, and it had come from the woods behind me. Either I truly was going insane, or someone or something in that woods was trying to scare me, toying with me. So I ran. I forgot that my legs were on fire. I forgot that my feet felt like I had just finished a 30-hour shift of standing behind a register. I didn't worry about the mud or the mess I was bringing with me. I sprinted to my car, dove in, and drove off as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure emerge from the trailhead. I didn't see it long enough to make out any detail, but I know one thing for sure. It was too tall to be a 10-year-old girl. I really don't know what to think. I don't really believe in monsters or ghosts, but I don't know how to explain what I experienced. Maybe some asshole that's really good at imitations and throwing his voice spent hours trying to mess with me. It's hard to believe, but honestly, probably the most likely explanation. At least I want it to be. I skipped the hike I was supposed to do yesterday for obvious reasons, but I'm supposed to do another one tomorrow. It's in a different park hundreds of miles away from the Red Cedar Trail. Nothing weird has happened since I drove away from that figure 2 days ago, so I'm thinking I might go for it. I don't want to give up on hiking and camping for my entire life because of what may or may not have happened to me. And this trail is shorter and more popular. There will almost definitely be more people around this time. It'll be fine, I hope.
If you see me staring at you at night, run.
She'd warned me on the very first night, but of course, I didn't listen. Aunt Suzanne's home smells like a delicious blend of spices and herbs which she uses for cooking, medicine, and making perfumes. Her home is by far the most whimsical place I've ever seen, filled with all sorts of keepsakes, big or small. You can hardly see that the house has any walls because of the big posters of old cities and movies, as well as Arabic wall carpets, from bright purple to deep green. My mother's older sister lives all by herself. She never got married, which is a big deal in our family. But Suzanne doesn't mind. She has her own house, her own life, and makes all her own choices. Her home truly is deserving of the word. However, as soon as I step out of the comfort of those bright walls, her village seems to suffocate me. I felt the tension of this place the second that I arrived at the train station. Everything was wrapped in a light fog, accompanied by an intense, foul smell that crept all the way down my nostrils. At first, I was happy to come here for a weekend, to escape the noise of the city and spend some days in a tiny village in western Germany. It was almost May, the sun was back, and I felt almost optimistic. I felt relieved to get away from my parents, my brother, and even more from my new boyfriend for a while. The only weird part was that my mum was the one who suggested the trip, even though she hates it when I'm in touch with Suzanne, because
she's a bad influence.
But now I've learned that this place is no home. It's an exile. And there is no sun, or at least you can hardly see it. I have no idea how weather generally works, but I certainly know that it can't be right to sit on a train for 6 hours and only see one single place that is entirely swallowed by gray.
Lona!
I heard a familiar voice shout out from behind the fog. Aunt Suzanne appeared, dressed in a long, airy skirt, with at least 5 necklaces around her neck and 6 rings on her fingers. Her curly hair that she dyes with henna was going in all directions. When she got close enough, she pulled me into a tight hug and gave me a kiss on each cheek. She smelled like lavender and roses.
Let's get you home, sweet girl. You must be starving.
My fun and energetic aunt made wine leaves filled with rice and herbs, which are my favorite, as well as those amazing semolina dumplings, tabbouleh, and lentil soup. Very typical Kurdish foods. They weren't quite as good as the ones my mum makes, but I didn't tell her that. After dinner, we sat in the living room, drinking tea and chatting about all sorts of stuff. School, friends, Berlin. After a while, I even told her about Noah, my boyfriend, but only because Suzanne is the only person in my family I feel like I can be candid with. Everything was going close to perfect. Inside her home, I almost forgot how eerie this village was. It was all great until it wasn't anymore. Until our conversation shifted. Suzanne turned her cup of tea around, maybe for a reading of the leaves, or maybe it was just out of habit.
I wanted to see you for a while now, honey. The last time you were here, you were, what, 6 or 7? I get that your mother doesn't like visiting, but...
She paused for a moment.
But she's the one who made me leave Berlin,
is probably what she wanted to say. My mum believes that Aunt Suzanne casts a bad light on our family.
She probably just doesn't like the smell. You know how sensitive she is.
I tried to joke, but I couldn't even look into her eyes. I hated how my mum abandoned her. I can't stand my brother at most times, and I still wouldn't do this to him.
Smell?
He raised an eyebrow.
Yeah, it smells rotten. Kind of like burned eggs and gasoline. I don't know. Not in here, outside,
I quickly added. Aunt Suzanne turned her cup back around.
Lona, when you were little, did your mom ever warn you about jinns?
She asked, ignoring what I said about the scent.
Only the one from Aladdin.
I laughed, but Aunt Suzanne's face didn't move a bit. My mother is quite a religious person. Everything evil must stay far away, ironically.
They are quite unpredictable, can change their shape. Not all are evil. Actually, concepts of our morality don't exactly work the same for them, as far as I understand. But some do like to inflict pain on humans, and they are rather good at that.
She sighed.
Some might find it ridiculous, but I am very aware of them. I don't want to anger any, even if only by accident. And while you are here, I wish you to respect that. Can you do that for me?
I had no idea what this sudden shift in conversation had come from, but Aunt Suzanne was staring at my eyes, not blinking once. There was such an intensity about it. I nodded. Maybe my aunt had gotten a little crazy living here all by herself. I know I would if I had to live in this industrial little hellhole.
I'm glad to hear that, sweetie. I've written a few things down. You can memorize them later, yeah?
The evening had started off so nicely, but ended with me alone, locked inside my aunt's guest room, reading a list that made me question her sanity and my own.
If you smell fire, get away as quickly as possible. They will burn you. Do not trust animals while you are here. Iron angers them. The fog is not there at all times. When it is, don't trust your mind. If it storms, go inside as quickly as possible. Do not ever stare down the well. They will pull you in.
I don't scare easily, and while odd, I didn't find the list too disturbing, until I came to the last warning.
If you see me staring at you at night, run.
Luckily, I didn't catch a stare on my first night. When morning came, I almost even forgot about all the weirdness. My aunt had left early for work, and I decided to go grab some croissants at a bakery. The fog was hardly noticeable that morning, though the foul scent of sulfur was still present. It got even more intense when I stepped inside the bakery, killing my hunger in an instant. But the lady behind the counter was already smiling at me, showing her big teeth. It smelled as if she'd spent the entire morning burning the bread.
What can I get you, sweetheart?
I looked down at the goods, but every single pastry was moldy, green and blue with a cotton film.
Actually, I'm not hungry. I just wanted to see.
Her smile disappeared.
I spend every single day baking. What kind of nasty tone is that? Who the f*** even are you? Who brought you here?
She talked herself into a rage, spitting with each word. Before I could step back, she grabbed my arm and pulled me closer.
You don't belong here. You are not rotten. Yet.
She whispered. With her other hand, she grabbed a lighter and held a flame right under my hand. Finally, pulled my arm back.
Fight or flight?
I heard a voice in my head, but the one whispering flight won. Outside, I checked my hand. There was no burn mark and I felt no pain.
Did I just hallucinate?
My mind was so muddled that I didn't even notice that the fog was back for a good minute or two. I turned back towards the bakery once more, and when I saw the grin of the lady behind the glass, I started running. Of course, there had to be a correlation between the items on my aunt's list and this lady. My aunt was living in an infected place. It felt clear to me right away. My mother never spoke about demons to me, but I do know that they play an important role in our family. I used to think they were old village superstitions, never listened much when an uncle or cousin spoke about rituals or similar, but lately, my mind has grown more interested. Ever since I started going through a few changes myself. The thing is, it's my father's family who was into this stuff, not my mum's. So coming to Suzanne, I believed to get a break. But now I knew for a fact that this place was cursed, and I was starting to wonder if I'd fallen into a trap. My nerves were a wreck. I should have run to the train station instead of my aunt's home, but I didn't. Something was keeping me from leaving. This place felt suffocating, but simultaneously, it felt as if I belonged here. Those thoughts ran through my mind when I fell into the comfortable bed of Suzanne's guest room. She wasn't home, so I couldn't speak to her yet, and finally, exhaustion took me over and I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was already dark. I heard a knock on the door, then a scratch, then someone tried to open the door. Suzanne would have said something, but whoever it was didn't speak. It's fine, I locked the door, I kept telling myself, but the rattling only became louder. And finally, I heard the squeaky noise of the door opening. Sometimes when you are scared, your eyes simply won't open. They try to shield you from what's to come. This time it was different. My eyes opened wide as if I'd just woken from a nightmare. But in reality, I was just falling into one. My eyes met Suzanne's, although hers looked nothing like the warm, almond-shaped ones I remembered. Instead, they were turned inside out, like socks that you fold into each other.
Chernobog,
an unfamiliar voice whispered from inside her mouth. I have no idea what that word meant, but when I heard it, a shock ran through my entire body. It felt as if a million worms inside of my mind were being pulled apart. The creature that was wearing the skin of my aunt shuffled its feet across the floor, walking closer to my bed. Again, the voice in my mind whispered fight or flight. And this time it wanted to fight. But I remembered the words on the list. I was supposed to run. So I jumped from the bed before the thing could come any closer. A shiver went through my body when I passed it, especially when it tried to reach for me with its fingers. I headed out the door and slammed it shut behind me. I ran into the darkness of my aunt's house, stumbling into tables and walls, but not stopping until I finally stumbled into something soft that smelled like lavender and roses.
It's okay,
the familiar voice of my aunt whispered.
That was not me. To be perfectly honest, I thought your uncle sent you, but I felt it was too soon to ask. I don't know how much you know about his business.
The drug business or the demons? I wanted to ask. I learned a little while ago that my powerful uncle has access to the underworld in more ways than one. It was one of the reasons I wanted to get away from home.
Well, this is where used-up hosts come,
my aunt continued.
And your uncle sometimes sends the ones he can't control.
We'd turned on all the lights in the house. Suzanne made tea, and after a while, I slowly calmed down. The thing is, I don't know why I was so afraid. I should have been used to these things by now. I'd learned weeks ago that I myself was possessed by a creature. Not a djinn, but a different type of demon. One that I'd grown accustomed to because it gave me power and confidence. Here somehow, it was much weaker though.
Used up?
I asked. He stayed quiet for a moment.
Sometimes humans get sick, old, or they die, but the demon possessing them can stay alive.
So everyone here is dead or dying? Are you? She shook her head.
I'm here because your uncle didn't want me near your family, and your mother listens to what he says. But I've started to like it here. I have a purpose. I care for the lost souls.
She tried to smile, but her eyes looked sad and tired. Something inside of me started pulsating, and I wondered if that's why my mum sent me here. Does my family believe that I'm a lost soul? Are they trying to get rid of me? In college, there was a guy on our floor named Steve, who was studying evolutionary psych and was constantly conducting different psychological tricks and experiments on us. They were all pretty cool and challenged us to think outside the boundaries of our minds. One night, he came back with a mirror game. It was similar to other dares and challenges involving mirrors like Bloody Mary or Candyman. Only in this case, the villain that showed up in the reflection was you. Kind of. The game involved perception, namely your perception of yourself. From there, it expanded outwardly, encompassing other people and places and their relation to you. All you needed was yourself, a mirror, and complete concentration. I had a mirror, but it was a long week and all I wanted to do was sleep, so I stayed in. A floor-wide email was sent out inviting everyone to try it in their rooms. The game was called the Jamais Vu Challenge. Jamais vu is a French phrase and translates to being the literal opposite of déjà vu. Whereas the latter, déjà vu, translates to already seen, jamais vu translates to never seen. In a psychological sense, it relates to the phenomenon of experiencing a situation that should be familiar, but is instead foreign and unrecognizable. Seeing things or people that you should know, but for some reason, they appear as strangers or unknowns. Everyone has experienced some form of this in their life. An easy example would be if you've ever been looking for something in your home. After minutes of searching, you finally locate it in a place you know you checked multiple times, but for some reason, it blended into the surroundings and its familiarity made it invisible, or temporarily unknown. The Jamais Vu challenge was grounded in this idea. The challenge played with our own perception of who we are, and had very simple directions. You had to be in front of a mirror, and you had to keep it close to your face. Then you had to stare into your own eyes and say your name repeatedly. The name repetition and eye contact with your reflection allowed you to accelerate the familiarity you had with your name and face. The objective was to say your name so many times, the word no longer made sense to you, while at the same time concentrating on your face so diligently, you no longer recognized it. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're brave, you can try it. You'll be surprised with how quickly your name means nothing and your face becomes a stranger's. How the sounds and syllables turn alien and your eyes, nose and lips morph into an outsider's. The challenge, if done correctly, made you forget who you were. So, in a sense, it shaves you down to your most basic human instincts. It reminded me of a story I once heard from a drama teacher. She had a student who was quiet and reserved, and had a hard time breaking out of her shell. The teacher convinced her to do a heavy scene that involved a loud scream at the end. The student played the part well, but she couldn't manage the scream in the finale. The teacher pushed the student and kept at her, trying to pull out something deeper. Then she did. The student began to scream. A horrific, guttural shriek, and she wouldn't stop. She just kept going. The teacher tried to calm her down. The other students tried as well. But it was like a switch had been flicked deep inside the student, and some electrical bolt of emotional fear charged through her. The screams were terrifying. They were animalistic. They sounded far down the evolutionary rabbit hole. The student found something, somewhere inside of her that was so unsettling, it made several other students throw up. An ambulance eventually arrived and the student was taken away. Even as she was driven off, you could hear her screaming. The teacher never saw or heard of the girl again, which was annoying because I wanted to know more. I always pictured the student in some asylum, probably sedated, her vocal cords numbed down, but still trying to scream. The switch inside of her somehow still stuck in the on position. My roommate Allie told me she was joining the challenge and was doing it next door. I had zero interest in that and fell asleep on the couch. A storm hit that night. I woke up just before midnight from knocks at the door between claps of thunder. The knocks were uneven and strange, and the door was unlocked. I opened it to find Allie. She was frazzled and nervously trembling as she looked in at me. I warmly reached out to wave her in, but she pulled back. Allie looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize, or know, or trust. She looked back down the hall, which I realized had smoke gathering in the air. I peeked out and saw the smoke coming from a room down the hall. I heard movements and struggling sounds coming from the rooms. Everything felt off. I reached forward again, warmly, and this time Allie was receptive. I put my arm around her and guided her in. She became like a baby under my arm, infant-like, as if needing protection. I tried to talk to Allie, but she wasn't speaking right. Her words were coming out in long, strangely connected mumbles. They sounded backwards and upside down, like a stroke having a stroke. I brought Allie to the bathroom and closed the door to give her privacy. She behaved like she didn't want me to leave her, but was unable to speak the words. It was all so bizarre. I felt like I was still sleeping. I panicked, wondering if I should call the RA or go straight to calling an ambulance. Then I heard a scream. It was from somewhere on this floor, further down the hall near the rec room. Then the fire alarm went off, and another, and another. But just as soon as they did, I heard 3 loud, individual cracks, and the ringing shorted out. I tried calling Steve. I could hear his cell phone ringing somewhere in the hallway. It continued ringing all the way into voicemail. No one answered. I tried again, but nothing. It kept ringing until it stopped. I waited a few minutes until the hallway had been quiet long enough. Then I grabbed a pen-sized can of pepper spray and quietly opened the door and peeked out. It reeked of burnt toast. The hall was filled with smoke now, and I could barely see the next door. I crept along the wall, passing the closed doors of the other students' rooms. Behind some of the doors, there were sounds, unintelligible mumbles and cries. My plan was to get to Marie's room. She was our RA, and her room was at the far end of the hallway near the kitchen area. I continued along the hall and passed through the rec room. The TV was on, and an old episode of Jeopardy was playing. Laughlin, one of the guys on our floor, was sitting in front of the TV, staring mindlessly and mumbling the same way as Allie. He made me uneasy, and he wasn't acting like the normal guy I would watch shotgunning beers in bathroom stalls. I backed up, deciding to go back to my room and try calling Marie instead. I turned back to the hallway and the cloud of smoke. There was a crying sound coming from deep within it. Between the sobs, there were mumbles and backwards words. That same stroke-like cadence. It was a sad, disturbed crying that made me want to run back to my room and bolt the door. The silhouette got closer and turned into Laura, another student. Laura's room was down the hall, near the staircase. She was stumbling towards me, her hands cupped out in front of her. She was trying to speak, but crying through it. Laura tripped, falling forwards, her hands out and pleading for some kind of sustenance. I didn't know what to do, so I backed up. And just as I did, a new shadow appeared. It was Steve, and he'd lost his mind. Steve was swinging one of his baseball bats, which was covered in blood. He himself was also covered in blood, and his clothes were ripped and shredded. His eyes were wild, and he was screaming violent jumbles of words. Steve didn't see me, but he saw Laura. He grunted at her and swung the bat viciously. The bat connected with the side of Laura's head, sending her sprawling into a room. Steve followed her in, swinging the bat like he was playing whack-a-mole. Laura's screams and cries drowned out and were replaced by the slapping thud of Steve's bat against flesh and bone. I rushed across the doorway and tried to make it down the hall, but Steve heard me and chased me down. Steve got a hold of me 2 doors down from my own. He had one arm around me and was trying to pull me to the ground. I got a hand free and pulled out my pepper spray. I struggled and fought and managed to press it right into one of his eyes while I was shooting it. Steve screamed and let go of me. I shoved him back and ran through the smoke. I got inside my room and locked the door. He never came to the room, but I heard him crying and hitting the walls as he patrolled the hall. I got a knife from my mini kitchen and went to check on Allie. I found her huddled up in the far end of the bathtub. She reached out to me like a child would its mother. I spent the next hour holding her and rocking her to sleep. Campus and state police arrived and cleared out all the rooms. They found us in the bathtub. Allie was still spouting gibberish, but I could speak and told them what I knew. As we were escorted out of our room and down the hall, I saw numerous body bags in rooms in the kitchen. I knew Laura had died, but it didn't hit me until then how much larger this all was. In the end, it turned out that Steve had killed 7 students and the RA Marie. Allie eventually recovered, regaining her memory of self and others. Steve went into an asylum. He's very lucid and normal now as well, but he has a strange animal quality to his eyes, like everything he looks at is prey. Most people would be terrified if they looked in the mirror and what they saw back wasn't their face, but their character. And it's made me wonder what mine would have looked like if I'd done the Jamas Vu challenge. If I would have been like Steve and fallen into a deep, evolutionary well that supercharged my limbic system. If the lizard tail in my amygdala would have brought me back to infancy, or turned me into something dangerous, I'll never know. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my computer and surfing the internet. I know Halloween is basically 2 months away, but still, it's better to just have everything beforehand. I'm big on eBay and Etsy, supporting small businesses. So after spending like 20 minutes on eBay and finding nothing I liked, it was on to Etsy. The first thing I typed into the search bar was scary masks and then waited for results. I scrolled down a bit, then came across a profile with a picture I recognized from an artist I liked. I clicked on the picture and watched as my screen switched itself to their profile. Assuming by the name, Brandon Goner, they were probably a guy. I looked at his About Me and it said he made masks and props. I clicked away and looked over his profile more. He followed no one and he also had no followers. His favorite shops were public, and the only thing he had favorited was a knife shop. He also had 2 collections of his own products. One was labeled masks and the other props. I clicked on masks and scrolled through. All of the masks were what seemed to be human and animal faces, all made with surprising detail. Unlike the human ones, the animal ones seemed to be made to give off the appearance of being stretched. Honestly, it kinda creeps me out how realistic they were. As if he had actually stretched the face of a real animal. I singled out one of the masks. A mask that appeared to be the face of a man, with rugged cream skin and a scar dragging itself along its cheek. Freckles were littered across its face, and it had a light stubble. Again, the attention to detail was incredible, and it would be great for a costume I had in mind. I quickly got my credit card from my drawer and bought the mask. When I had officially confirmed the order, I wasn't expecting to get a message from Brandon.
Thanks for the purchase. You're my first buyer.
Oh, no problem. I just needed a mask for Halloween and yours looked pretty cool.
I'm gonna throw in a few extra treats for you. A couple props maybe, and an animal mask, since you were so kind.
You really don't have to. You should sell those.
No, I need them off my back. They are taking up space in my apartment.
After that, I didn't reply. I waited with anticipation until my package came the following Monday. The box was bigger than I expected. It was a plain cardboard box with no stickers or writing on it at all, which was strange. But I knew it had to be my order. I wasn't expecting anything else. But the smell was even stranger. I could smell it before I even opened the box. It was putrid and sour. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but I could taste it on my tongue, so I immediately closed my mouth. I sat down on my couch, package in my lap and a knife by my side. As I dug my knife through the tape, my roommate came up behind me, his hand gripping the couch.
Hey, Gary.
He looked over my shoulder.
What's that?
I dragged my knife through the rest of the tape and opened the box.
Oh, nothing. Just stuff I got for Halloween.
The mask I had originally ordered was on top of everything else. Nothing was wrapped, just lazily thrown on top of each other. I spotted a cat mask underneath my human one, making itself quite noticeable with its orange fur. I picked up the human mask and examined it. There were threads in the cheeks connecting themselves behind the face, which was probably so I could put it on and wear it, just like a normal mask. I ran my hands over the cheeks and immediately drew back. It felt like real skin. Like my skin.
Freaky,
Jaden said, leaning over the couch.
I know, right?
I said, turning my head to look at him. His mouth was turned down into a frown, and his eyebrows were furrowed.
That looks super real. What else is in there? You got props?
He reached over my shoulder, pulled a hand out of the box, and then dropped it immediately.
Ew.
He drew his hand back and wiped it on the couch like it had something on it.
What is that made of?
I have no idea. Weird, right?
I grabbed the mask and waved it jokingly in front of Jaden's face, earning a loud groan and an eye roll. He shoved my hand away and looked at me again.
That smells like literal fish. Are you seriously gonna wear it?
Duh, I'll just wipe it down or something.
I put the mask back in the box and closed it.
I don't know what I'm gonna do with all the random body parts, though.
Just keep them away from me. For the love of God, please put that in your room before it smells everything up.
He called, walking over to the kitchen.
I should just put it in your room. It already reeks of weed and BO.
I told him as I stood up, the box in my arms.
It does not.
He said, opening the fridge.
Whatever.
I mumbled, walking to my room. I put the box in my closet, pushing it over on the top shelf above my clothes. I really hoped it wouldn't stink up my closet or my clothes. I went to my bed and sat down, pulling out my phone and checking my notifications. The local news app I was subscribed to had posted a new article. It was headlined, "Man found dead in park. Police say it's the most gruesome thing they've ever seen." I won't take a screenshot, since it won't allow me to. I'll just copy and paste some of it down below. At 6:22 a.m., the police got a call from a woman going on a jog at Redacted Park. Upon the police's arrival, she claims to have spotted a leg poking out of a bush and went to check on whoever it may have been. When she went to go and check, she found the leg wasn't attached to a body, prompting her to call the police.
At first, I thought maybe it was just a prop, like a gag someone left there to freak people out. But the smell was so bad, and it looked so real,
He said. Police searched the park and found a dead cat and man. His leg was missing, matching up with the one that the jogger had found in the bushes. The police did not find a collar on the cat, nor did they find a face. The man currently remains unidentified, as his face was missing too, as well as one of his hands. The investigation will continue, and the woman will be brought in for questioning, as well as other possible suspects. They did write more, but I didn't find it necessary to post all of that. I removed the park name, since it's not really a good idea to post the location of a park located right by where I live. I know I'm probably overreacting, like I don't even know what that man looked like or the cat, but it was so near to my house, and they looked so real. The coincidence is insane. And the smell is so bad, like it's actually rotting. As I'm writing this, I can smell the stink leaking out of my closet. I was really just gonna leave it and ignore it, but I don't know if I should take it to the police or not. And a couple of minutes ago, I got this message from the seller. It's like he knows I'm thinking about it, and I'm really regretting buying from him.
Did you like the masks? Sorry about the smell, by the way. The guy I got it from really stunk.